Final Fantasy IV originally released in 1991 developed by Square, but it's based on a 3D remake made by Matrix Software that released on the DS 2007, but this is the Steam port of the 3D remake, which is a port of the iOS port of the 3D remake, which you can tell because of the fact that menus are so big, because they're designed for you to just tap on them. The major change for this port is the fact that it removes the DS exclusive summon that you could have been customized and little minigames associated with it. This one also includes a new easier mode called normal mode, because the people could put on the DS version being too difficult, but you still do have the DS difficulty, but it's now labeled under hard mode rather than just labeling new mode easy mode and DS mode normal mode. They decided, let's call the new easy mode normal. The goal of Final Fantasy IV's development was to be the first quote-unquote real narrative in a Final Fantasy game, because I guess Final Fantasies 1, 2, and 3 don't count. But that's why the main goal is the story and everything else, which is for both good and bad, I'll explain later on. Our main premise is the protagonist, Cecil, who is a dark knight that works for the Barren Kingdom. He has been assigned to do tasks that involves going to different locales in Mysidia, attacking them and stealing their crystals, with people of Mysidia doing nothing to even fight back against Barren's army, but still being assigned to slaughter them, with Cecil questioning whether or not any of this is right, and what is the king going after, since normally things would be more peaceful, so why are we just slaughtering innocent people? After questioning the king's goals, Cecil ends up getting punished and told to deliver a package to the village of Mist, with his best friend Kain going with him. But upon delivering the package, it turns out it was actually a device set to destroy the village, and Cecil was essentially tricked into causing more harm.
He wished this village torched.
But why? Why?
Cecil and Kain making a pact that they will unite the world against Barren Kingdom and warn other kingdoms that Barren will be coming to take their crystals by any means necessary. By after forming this pact, the last summoner Rydia ends up summoning Titan, which ends up stranding Cecil and Rydia elsewhere from wherever Kain got sent. So now it's up to Cecil to go on his journey and also protect Rydia for not only destroying her entire village, but also inadvertently killing her mom when they went to go deliver the package to begin with. Right off the bat, so much happens in the story, with the big focus being on Cecil. And I will note that I know they show Cecil's face in this version because of the fact that, 3D cutscenes want to show him emoting, his face, everything, choreography. But it's also a bit weird since in the original release, you would not see Cecil's face for a good many hours because of the Dark Knight armor covering up his face. So it just feels weird how it feels like Cecil might as well not even have the helmet, because most of the time he's constantly opening it up to show his face. And while Final Fantasy IV is very story heavy, with the fact that the story also dictates who was in your party at certain moments in the game, making Final Fantasy IV very linear in that aspect, it's also the fact that the story revolves more around Cecil. So while the side characters do get stuff for them and side quests that can help bolster them, some side characters get way less than others since the main goal is Cecil. Like, there is one character who's part of your final party lineup named Edge, who has their entire introduction, motivation, resolution, all their entire growth happen within the span of an hour and a half. From introduction to the end of their arc happened so quickly, which is also just about Final Fantasy IV. How much it wants to pretty much get all these character arcs and aspects done quickly, whether it be something that just got introduced, or something that got introduced a bit, but an hour and a half later, we've now reached the end point of that aspect. There's also certain aspects of the characters that instead go more unspoken. Like, if you notice certain aspects of the character, let's say Kain and how he acts throughout the game, you can notice certain aspect of his character that's not strictly spoken out loud. In fact, it's treated as so subtle that I've seen people just flat out think it was not a part of Final Fantasy IV, and that the spin-off sequel titled The After Years retconned it part of his character when that was never the case. Or, setting for another example, Rydia, who you may notice does not have the fire spell in her menu of black magic, with there being a reasoning for that, but when it comes to a resolution of her eventually obtaining the fire spell, the conflict is mentioned out loud for the first time, and then resolved in the same scene. So it's a cool thing gameplay-wise, but it also feels, again, it was just immediately to the point of, we brought up a conflict and solved it very quickly. Which is not a bad thing that Final Fantasy IV does. Final Fantasy IV getting to the point of character stories isn't a bad thing at all, but just makes you notice the fact that certain aspects of the narrative just go by so quickly. Final Fantasy IV has so much going on. It feels like so much happens so fast because so many things start and end so quickly. But characters like Cecil don't have that luxury, which is why his narrative spans way farther than anyone else's. Like, sure, Cecil feels guilt and wants redemption on the stuff he's done, and as the game's opening and constant artwork is shown, he does eventually become a Paladin, but his story arc doesn't end there just because he's become a Paladin, since he still now has to actually make up for the stuff he's done and everything. So his character arc goes way further than the other side characters, and also the villain in this game, Golbez, also has actually more stuff shown in this version of Final Fantasy IV. There are new cutscenes to flesh out Golbez as a villain in this game, so he also gets more as well. The only gripe I have with Final Fantasy IV's story actually has to do with the character edge that I brought up earlier. It's because Final Fantasy IV makes it a point that letting yourself be consumed with anger and darkness will essentially lead to a bad outcome, and that there are characters who are so revenge-filled that trying to go with their revenge may not go well for them. So it's one of those things where you need to pretty much start embracing more of the light, which is why Cecil goes from a Dark Knight to a Paladin. The problem I have with this is the character Edge. His entire story arc is a revenge mission, is him going after revenge. And rather than having a negative outcome for his hatred, for his anger, he actually gets a power-up for it. He gets stronger from that rage, when Final Fantasy IV makes the point that such rage and lust for revenge will only lead to some form of destruction, and somehow Edge benefits from this? Like, it feels like the antithesis of what Final Fantasy IV is going for, and yet somehow it's a major story moment, and Edge gets rewarded for it, and I don't understand. I don't understand why this thing for Edge exists, why I don't like Edge. It feels like he should not be getting rewarded for giving into anger.
You think our rage a weakness? Then let me show you how wrong you are!
But aside from not liking Edge and also like his personality, or his kingdom for that matter, overall, the story of Final Fantasy IV is great. It does work, everything. It does work well enough what they're going for. You can feel that this is a case of developers trying their best to try and make a big overarching narrative, and while I did enjoy the narratives related to Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3, you can see that this is the big effort one, but like I said, it does have drawbacks gameplay-wise, which we'll now get into those drawbacks when it comes to trying to make things narrative first in this game, even if this narrative is good. Also, in this version of Final Fantasy IV, the characters have thought bubbles when you open the menu, so you can see how each character reacts to story scenarios, even that in side quests, and just get their 2 cents across, although it does have many moments where characters have the epitome of no thoughts, head empty kind of thing at times. Now for the gameplay, with Final Fantasy IV being the first entry to introduce the active time battle, where every character has a meter. Once it's full, they can take their turn. with Final Fantasy IV also giving you a second meter when the character does a spell, so just showing you how long it takes them to cast that spell. The DS version goes further, it shows you how long it takes characters to do any action of the game, which is very good because it can show you certain aspects, like the fact that you can perfectly time reviving a KO party member and then having a healer do a party heal on everyone right after, so that person will immediately get knocked back down right after. Certain aspects like that is why I really appreciate the meter shown twice on screen at all times, although it's only in Final Fantasy IV, only in this DS version. For some reason, I wish other Final Fantasy games inherited this aspect of the active time battle system. Every character has their assigned combat role through their narrative purpose, so Cecil being a Dark Knight initially starts out with the move Darkness. In this version of 3D Remake, Darkness instead buffs Cecil's attack at the cost of draining his HP. I had to mention this because in other 2D iteration of Final Fantasy IV, it was instead a enemy party-wide attack that would drain its HP. So here is now a buff to Cecil's attack rather than its own separate attack, but it still has the same drawback of it takes Cecil's HP in order to activate. Kain, being Dragoon, has the ability to jump, and this is the most abusable ability in the entire game, because when Kain jumps, he effectively leaves the game, which means any major attack that happens, Kain will just not be there for and will take damage for it. Since the story controls the party setup, it means that for every major encounter, you will always have the tools needed to win the fight, just to figure out what to do with the characters you have in order to actually win the fight. So it's one of those things where I want you to experiment the party compositions they give you. And if you have knowledge of Final Fantasy IV, and you also know that certain characters leave the party for one reason or another. Also, that just because they leave doesn't mean they still don't have also story moments for them. But in addition to the 3D Remake is the augment system, where you can get certain abilities, whether passive or active, to give to party members. And I've seen people make the massive mistake where they will use their knowledge of Final Fantasy IV and not give augments to party members who leave. No, that is a mistake. You want to give them that, because if you give that to characters who leave, then they will leave behind their unique skills that you can then use later in the game, and there are some fantastic skills those party members have that you would love to have and equip to the final roster of characters when it comes to Final Fantasy IV's 3D Remake. An example is the fact that characters Palom and Porom do eventually leave the party. But if you give them augments, they will leave behind their unique skills, Cry and Bluff. Cry being very good in this version of Final Fantasy IV because it reduces the defense and magic defense of every enemy in the game, so you want to have that Cry ability later on. You also have the Bluff ability to make the black magic attacks more powerful, so you get that to a black mage later on, and they will be more powerful, stuff like that. Give them even more abilities, and they'll give you the ability of double cast, which allows you to cast 2 spells in the same turn on a mage. Stuff like that is what you want to give characters who leave augments, because they'll leave behind those abilities. There are also major fights in the game with the Archfiends of the Elements, and they too will leave behind augments if you revisit locales that were next to or associated with where they were. Once again, you want to get these augments to boost the character's abilities. Not just that, augments also have stat buffs, so even if you don't use the ability, you can just give the character the augment anyway, and it will buff their stats. This 3D remake of Final Fantasy IV is constantly cited as being one of the hardest Final Fantasy games, or the hardest version of Final Fantasy IV. Having just played through the game on a DS difficulty, I really don't see it. I went through most of the game not using augments because I would just forget to equip them even if I had a stat buff for them, or when Cecil became a Paladin I forgot to re-equip his augment abilities that I gave him, but just the fact that I went through most of the game not even using the augments on the DS difficulty. Like I said, it's more about just experimenting with what character setups you have, because the story gave you those characters for that fight for a reason. The augments definitely help, especially the late game ones that are optional you can get that involve stuff like being able to turn any spell that targets one person into a party-wide ability. So being like, hey Rosa, can you just cast haste the entire party at once? Okay, thanks, bye, kind of thing. So they definitely help, but they're nowhere near as essential as people make them out to be. On top of the fact that, well, yes, boss fights in this version have new quirks and gimmicks added onto them to make them more difficult. Your party members also have new quirks and stuff to make them more viable. Just the fact that, as a Paladin, Cecil's white magic now has more spells to use. Rosa's prey ability is now more consistent and better to use. The blessing ability now restores MPs of HP and stuff like that. The cry ability I mentioned in other versions of Final Fantasy IV did not drop an enemy's defense or magic defense, and instead did something else. So stuff like that they did to make your characters more viable and better in the game and everything. Or the fact that in this version, the game will now tell you to count use a character young and his focus ability. Focus makes it so his next attack does more damage, but you can now see how many times focus can stack. You also have status elements that do work on bosses, and the one you want to use, and please use it, cast slow or use a spider silk item on bosses. Every boss in the game can be slowed down, so please do it. If you're struggling on a boss, slow them down so that way they aren't getting as many turns and everything, and things will go more smoothly. You can have a character switch to defending during a boss's attack animation in order to reduce damage. I went into bosses where the boss has an attack, I can just wipe out most of my party and be right off the bat. But if I had them blocking during the attack animation, then they would at least survive it. They might have a lot of HP, but they'll survive it, and that's what matters. So please use all the tools you have and everything in order to match with the higher challenge of this game, because they give you the tools to match it even before you take into account the augment mechanic. And a good piece of advice is that when you get access to vehicles as the airship, immediately use it to start adventuring the world for side content and goodies. I already mentioned the augments can appear in certain locales throughout the game, where there be some towns you can revisit, some dungeons you revisit, so you want to search around and do the side content. They give you the ability to scour the world with the airship. Freaking use it, please. Don't just immediately go to the next story set piece and then be surprised, unprepared. Like, they give you the freedom very quickly to just start going around and doing stuff and everything. So take advantage of it and start exploring. Yes, Final Fantasy IV does not have a lot or the most interesting side content, but it still has them and they can still benefit the characters. One gripe I do have gameplay wise is the fact that new characters who join always join at a preset level. While it does give you a good barometer for where the game wants to be level wise, it does irk me because there can be points where a character leaves and comes back later, and by that point everyone else is now higher level than them, and it's like, great, they're now weaker because of this whole entire aspect kind of thing. So like when I got Kain back later, and he just was now the lowest level party member in the entire game as a result, whoops, kind of thing. Or when I first got Edge, and Edge was the lowest level because everyone else was already at way higher level than him. Stuff like that irks me when the levels be so distant apart. Like when I got Edge, he was 10 levels lower than the rest of the party. That kind of thing. So it's one of those things that irks me, that the fact that the levels aren't averaged out when they join. They're preset because of the story aspect. I just wish that characters came out a level like 1 to 2 levels lower than the party average. I know other Final Fantasy games do that, but this one doesn't. There is also one scripted moment in the game where it's during a boss fight where if you don't have Cecil up, if Cecil is KO'd in the boss fight and the party wins, the scripted moment will immediately result in a game over, because the moment was only designed where Cecil has to be the last one left standing. So if Cecil is KO'd at the end of the fight, then the rest of the party get KO'd because of the scripted segment, and the game's over, and that's you being screwed over because the developers wanted a story set piece, and the story set piece said, screw your gameplay because Cecil's not up right now. That means game over because everyone else got KO'd for the story. Granted, there is also one boss fight where it's supposed to have a big moment where it goes from like these 6 dolls to one massive doll, But you can actually take out the 6 dolls before it transforms and just win the fight then and there. And there's also some cool stuff in gameplay like that. Or there's these fights against Baron soldiers with Commander. But we take out the Commander first, then the soldiers immediately get confused and don't know what to do for a turn. To take advantage of that, you want to go to the Commander first, who will have more HP, but it's just a cool thing you can do, and just neat aspects in the gameplay of Final Fantasy IV. Hell, with the character Edge, you can steal from enemies, and in previous versions of Final Fantasy IV, there was no real reason to steal from the final boss. Here, there is a reason. If you steal the item Dark Matter from the final boss, then it will allow you access into a New Game Plus only super boss. In fact, Final Fantasy IV DS not only actually has a proper New Game Plus feature, it also gives you a new augment to allow the party to do more than the damage limit, but it's also the fact that you need an item to unlock the boss fight, and in order to get all the augments, you would have to essentially beat Final Fantasy IV, this version, at least 3 times. So they thought about what to do for repeat playthroughs. So that's very notable, because one of the issues Final Fantasy IV people had is the fact that because it's so linear and there's no actual player freedom in gameplay, people didn't really feel all that incentivized to replay Final Fantasy IV because of it. Also the fact that super bosses were not added to Final Fantasy franchise until 5, so the 4DS remake actually adds in 2 super bosses that otherwise Final Fantasy IV wouldn't really have anything like that. Last thing I know would be some more quirks with the Steam/mobile port Final Fantasy IV 3D remake. So there's the fact that now the OST has been rearranged on the DS version and uncompressed, since the DS's device can only do so much. They upscaled the FMVs and everything. Although there are weird quirks because the character models are a bit upscaled, you're able to see things in cutscenes you weren't supposed to see, like instances where the characters' mouths aren't even moving but they're talking in the cutscene, or this one awkward bit where Rydia goes from completely mad to suddenly having the biggest smile on her face.
Leave me alone! I hate you!
So stuff like that are a bit of oversight that comes with upscaling a game that wasn't meant to have such clean visuals, as we look at a DS or lower resolution everything. So it's quirks like that. People also taking gripes with the game's font choice. I mean, I like the fact that it's big and readable, but I understand the complaint that it looks too basic and everything, but you can mod the font everything, and it's nowhere near as bad as Pixel Remaster's default font aspect, but I can understand it doesn't really have the whimsy and everything that a game like Final Fantasy would have, even if I think it makes it more readable for the text and everything. On top of also not having the DS only stuff, such as lacking the whole entire thing with the Adolin Wits or White, that's just pronounced, it's spelled W-H-Y-T, and the mini games I'd associated with on a DS that I swear no one has really archived footage of at all, because I couldn't find anything. I don't know, I just recorded my own bit for that. But it was somebody could just customize its face, do little mini games, get abilities for the entire party, and then also customize abilities. You essentially play automatically if you were to summon it in battle, and because the story logic that if for summon's Idolin dies, the summoner dies, it means if it got KO'd, so did Rydia as well. Kind of whole entire aspect. So there's just stuff like that. There's a bonus for the DS version that got removed in this port, since I guess they just didn't want to retool the minigames in any way, shape, or form. So minigames were designed with a touchscreen in mind. Overall, Final Fantasy IV 3D Remake is a great version of Final Fantasy IV and has its own content that makes it stand apart from the other version of Final Fantasy IV. Some people give this version flack, acting as if it shouldn't exist or shouldn't have been archived. It recently got released on GOG as well, and I saw people applaud, other people upset that it was a 3D remake and not the Pixel Remaster version. Some people feel like this one should just go away, and I don't understand the hate. I don't understand people complain that's way more difficult when it's just asking you to actually use the tools of the game, because otherwise Final Fantasy IV is a very linear game that doesn't really ask much of the player in other versions. Like, my only theory is that people who played the Super Nintendo American release, where they actually nerfed the game heavily to a point where I mentioned Cecil's darkness ability, he didn't even have darkness in the localized US version of Final Fantasy IV back when they called it Final Fantasy II. Stuff like that, where characters didn't have abilities, they removed items to simplify it, they nerfed enemies, they boosted XP, stuff like that. I understand if you played that version and thought, oh, Final Fantasy IV is an easy game, and then get to this version and realize, oh, now you're actually having a more challenging experience, without anything too ridiculous. Yes, the bosses have new quirks to them, but they're very manageable quirks. They can see what they're doing and go, okay, so if I use this character like this, and stuff like that, in order for your advantage. Or, just slow down the bosses. Slow down the bosses. Slow down bosses with a slow spell, please. Or, have your characters defend. Actually block. Actually use defense command for once, please. I feel like people don't use defense much when it comes to a turn-based RPG at points. So I gotta say about Final Fantasy IV 3D Remake, it is still a fantastic version of Final Fantasy IV that deserves more respect, because it adds a bit more context to certain characters in the game in order to flesh out the narrative better, as people come up the narrative of Final Fantasy IV. But most of all, you would think that would make this the version people seek out, on top of the voice acted cutscenes, and they are well voice acted, even if they are very melodramatic as well. That's all I got to say about Final Fantasy IV 3D Remake. Alrighty then, good day.